Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a spiritual truth that was hidden for over 2,000 years, a revelation so powerful that it was deliberately buried beneath layers of religious doctrine and institutional control. This isn't just another motivational message or positive thinking technique. This is about understanding the fundamental spiritual laws that govern how miracles actually work. The same laws that Jesus himself demonstrated not to show you how special he was, but to reveal what you're capable of or exceeding right now in this very moment. Have you ever wondered why your prayers for miracles seem to hit a ceiling, as if there's an invisible barrier between you and the divine breakthrough you're desperately seeking? You've prayed with all your heart. You've believed with everything you have. You followed every religious instruction perfectly, yet the miracle you need remains frustratingly out of reach. What if I told you that the very way you've been taught to pray is actually preventing the miracle from manifesting in your life? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Here's what most people don't realize. Every time you pray for a miracle, you're actually reinforcing the very consciousness that blocks it from appearing. Stay with me here because this is going to challenge everything you've been taught in Sunday school. When you beg God for healing, when you plead for a financial breakthrough, when you desperately petition for a relationship to be restored, you're operating from what spiritual teachers call a consciousness of lack. You're affirming through your very prayer that you don't have what you need, that you're separate from the divine source, that you're powerless and dependent on an external force to grant you favor. Joel Goldsmith, a spiritual teacher who spent 5 decades unlocking the mysteries of Christ consciousness, discovered something that religious institutions have worked tirelessly to keep hidden. He found that Jesus never intended to be the only miracle worker, standing as an unreachable divine figure that you worship from a distance. Instead, Jesus came to demonstrate a spiritual technology, a way of aligning with divine reality that every human being has access to. Has this ever happened to you? You've prayed fervently for something only to watch it remain unchanged while wondering what you're doing wrong. The problem isn't your faith. The problem isn't God's willingness. The problem is that you've been taught a method of prayer that actually contradicts the spiritual laws Jesus was teaching. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," he wasn't being poetic. When he promised that you would do greater works than these, he wasn't exaggerating. He was revealing that Christ consciousness, the state of awareness where miracles flow naturally, isn't something he possessed exclusively 2,000 years ago. It's your birthright, your true nature available to you right now. What you're about to discover might surprise you because it completely inverts everything traditional religion has taught about prayer, miracles, and your relationship with the divine. The shift from praying for miracles to receiving them instantly isn't about praying harder or believing more intensely. It's about understanding the fundamental difference between two opposite approaches to the divine. Think about every prayer you've ever prayed when you desperately needed a miracle. You probably started by acknowledging your unworthiness, confessing your sins, reminding God of your failures, and then begging for intervention. This is what I call beggar consciousness, and it's been programmed into you since childhood, through every religious institution that benefits from keeping you spiritually dependent. Here's the hidden truth that changes everything. When you pray from a position of lack, you're not demonstrating faith. You're actually declaring to the universe that you don't have what you need. You're affirming separation. You're reinforcing the very condition you're trying to escape. Every word of the petition is telling your consciousness, "I am incomplete. I am broken. I am separate from divine supply." And consciousness, being the creative force that it is, immediately goes to work manifesting more evidence of exactly what you're declaring. This is why people can pray for decades and see minimal results. It's not because God is withholding. It's not because you haven't suffered enough or proven yourself worthy. It's because the very mechanism you're using, petition prayer, creates the opposite consciousness of what you're seeking. Joel Goldsmith spent years unraveling this mystery, and what he discovered was revolutionary. True prayer isn't about asking at all. True prayer is about recognition. It's about aligning your awareness with what already exists in spiritual reality. If you're ready for spiritual truths that actually transform your life, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more here that will shift how you experience reality. Let me make this practical for you. When someone is sick and you pray for their healing, traditional religion teaches you to beg God to intervene and fix the disease. But here's what's really happening in that moment. You're acknowledging the disease as real and powerful. You're affirming that God is separate from the person, and you're positioning yourself as powerless to do anything but hope an external force shows mercy. Every part of that equation reinforces the problem rather than dissolving it. Now, I want to go even deeper into this paradigm shift because understanding the difference between praying to Jesus and praying from Christ consciousness is literally the key that unlocks everything. Most people have been taught to worship Jesus as a distant deity, someone infinitely above you who occasionally grants favors if you grovel convincingly enough. But that's not what Jesus taught at all. He never once said, "Worship me and stay small." He said, "Follow me," meaning, learn what I learned, do what I'm doing, access what I'm accessing. He promised you would do greater works than he did. Not greater prayers to him, but greater demonstrations of the same consciousness he embodied. This is the transformation that religion doesn't want you to experience because awakened people don't need institutional intermediaries. When you recognize that Christ consciousness isn't exclusive to Jesus but is actually your true nature, everything shifts. You're no longer a beggar hoping for divine intervention. You're a divine being remembering who you really are. The miracles don't come from outside. They emerge from within as you align with spiritual truth. This journey from separation to recognition is where the real power lives, and it's available to you right now, not someday when you've earned it. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for this shift," if this revelation is landing in your spirit. So how does this actually work when you're facing a real crisis? Let's say you receive a devastating medical diagnosis, or your bank account is empty, or a relationship you cherish is falling apart. Your immediate human response is to panic and start bargaining with God, making promises about who you'll become if only this situation gets fixed. But that entire approach keeps you locked in the consciousness that attracted the problem in the first place. Here's the practical application that Joel Goldsmith taught after decades of proving this works in real-world situations. When confronting illness, you don't pretend the symptoms aren't there. You're not denying reality or engaging in magical thinking. Instead, you're making a radical decision about what you consider to be ultimate reality. You acknowledge that yes, the body is showing symptoms, but you refuse to give those symptoms the final word about your spiritual identity. You recognize that in the realm of pure consciousness, in the invisible spiritual reality that underlies all physical appearance, there is no disease. There is no limitation. There is only wholeness, perfection, and infinite supply. This isn't about repeating affirmations until you convince yourself. It's about resting in a truth that exists whether you believe it or not. As you settle into that awareness, as you stop fighting the appearance and simply recognize what's true in spirit, something extraordinary begins to happen. The body starts reflecting the consciousness you're holding. Not because you forced it through willpower, but because physical form always follows consciousness. This is spiritual law, not religious hope. The transformation happens from the inside out, which is why external manipulation never produces lasting results. You can't think your way into a miracle while holding a consciousness of lack. You can access a miracle the moment you recognize that, in your true spiritual identity, the problem never existed in the first place. Now let me reveal something about the cross that will completely shift how you understand suffering and redemption. Everything you've been taught about why Jesus died is designed to keep you in perpetual guilt and dependency. The traditional narrative says, God was so angry about humanity's sin that he required a blood sacrifice, and Jesus took the punishment you deserved. That story makes God into a vengeful tyrant, and you into a condemned criminal who can only escape through someone else's suffering. But that's not what the cross demonstrates at all. Jesus wasn't paying off an angry deity. He was proving that even death itself has no power over consciousness. He went through the ultimate human fear, physical death, and emerged on the other side to show you that your true identity is indestructible. You are not this temporary body that experiences pain, aging, and eventual dissolution. You are an eternal consciousness having a temporary human experience. This completely transforms how you relate to every form of suffering. When challenges arise, you're not being punished by a judgmental God. You're not being tested to prove your worthiness. You're simply experiencing the outpicturing, the external manifestation of whatever consciousness you've been holding. Change the consciousness. And the experience must change, because the external world has no choice but to reflect your internal state. This is the hidden truth behind every spiritual teaching. The mechanics of how reality actually operates. Drop a comment saying consciousness creates. If this perspective is opening new doors for you, let me share a real story that demonstrates exactly how the shift from petition to e-recognition works in practice. Margaret was given a terminal diagnosis that doctors labeled incurable. She did everything traditional religion teaches. She attended healing services, had elders lay hands on her, fasted, confessed every sin she could remember, and spent hours begging Jesus to intervene. Month after month, nothing changed. Her body continued deteriorating and despair was replacing hope. When she finally encountered Joel Goldsmith's teaching, she was at the end of her rope, willing to try anything. Joel looked at her with compassion and said something that initially shocked her. Stop praying for healing and start recognizing wholeness. For 3 weeks, Margaret practiced a completely different approach. Every morning, instead of cataloging her symptoms to God, she sat in silence and recognized a simple truth. In spirit, there is no disease. She didn't deny her pain or pretend the symptoms weren't real. She simply refused to give them ultimate authority over her spiritual identity. The transformation didn't happen overnight like some charismatic miracle story. It unfolded gradually as her consciousness shifted. First, the fear dissolved. Then the pain began to lessen. Within 2 months, her doctors were baffled to find no trace of what they declared incurable. But here's what's crucial to understand. Margaret didn't get healed in the traditional sense. She recognized she'd never been separate from wholeness. The body simply reflected the change in consciousness. This is how spiritual law operates consistently and predictably once you understand the mechanics behind it. Now let me tell you about Robert, because his journey reveals something equally powerful about how consciousness shapes every area of life, not just health. Robert was a successful businessman who'd built his empire through aggressive competition and ruthless strategy. He believed success required struggle, that you had to fight for every advantage and crush your competitors. Then overnight, his entire business collapsed. Partners betrayed him, investments failed catastrophically, and he lost everything he'd spent years building. Desperate and broken, Robert found his way to Joel's teaching, and what he learned shattered his entire worldview. Joel showed him that his consciousness of struggle and competition had attracted exactly what he feared most: loss and betrayal. The external collapse was simply mirroring his internal state. Robert made a decision that seemed crazy to everyone around him. Instead of immediately scrambling to rebuild through the same aggressive tactics, he spent 6 months practicing what Joel called living from grace instead of law. Every single morning, Robert sat in meditation, recognizing divine abundance as the only reality. He didn't visualize specific amounts of money. He didn't create elaborate business plans. He didn't network or scheme. He simply rested in the awareness that an infinite supply exists in consciousness, and he allowed that awareness to guide his actions. The rebuilding took 2 full years, not 2 weeks, because real transformation happens at the pace of consciousness shifts. But what emerged was radically different from what had collapsed. Robert created a business founded on cooperation instead of competition, on genuine service instead of exploitation. He prospered beyond his previous success, but this time from a completely different internal foundation. These aren't isolated anomalies or lucky coincidences. They're demonstrations of spiritual law operating exactly as it's designed to operate when you align with it, instead of fighting against it through petition and struggle. Comment: my consciousness is shifting. If you're beginning to see how this applies to your specific situation, what Margaret and Robert discovered is what Joel called the practice of presence. And it's fundamentally different from every form of prayer you've been taught. Traditional prayer is you talking at God, presenting your wish list, explaining your problems, and hoping someone's listening. But real spiritual practice is the exact opposite. It's becoming silent enough to listen. It's recognizing that the presence you've been seeking outside yourself is actually the essence of who you are. Think about what happens in your mind during a typical prayer session. You're rehearsing problems, listing needs, describing lack, and essentially having a one-sided conversation with a God you imagine is somewhere far away. Joel discovered that this entire approach misses the point completely. When you truly grasp that Christ consciousness is your consciousness, not something separate you need to access through proper technique, everything shifts. You stop asking for things because you begin receiving the awareness of what already exists in the invisible realm of spirit. This is where most people struggle, because we've been conditioned to believe that spiritual practice requires effort, discipline, and constant doing. But the practice of presence is about releasing effort, not increasing it. It's about recognizing what's already true rather than trying to make something true. Everything you've been desperately seeking outside yourself, peace, abundance, healing, love, exists right now in consciousness. Your only work is to recognize it, accept it as already present, and watch as the external world rearranges itself to match what you're holding in awareness. If this shifted something in your awareness, hit that like button. It helps these teachings reach others who are searching for answers beyond traditional religion. Now this leads to something even more radical than Joel taught, something he called recognizing the nothingness of error. When a problem appears in your life, your immediate instinct is to fight it, fix it, or pray for its removal. You treat the problem as a real, powerful force that needs to be defeated. But Joel discovered through decades of demonstration that this approach actually empowers the very thing you're trying to eliminate. Every time you fight a problem, you're declaring it has power. Every time you pray for its removal, you're affirming it as real and threatening. Instead, the practice is recognizing that in spiritual reality, the problem doesn't exist. Not because you're pretending or engaging in denial, but because consciousness is the only actual cause and problems exist, only in the realm of appearance, not in the realm of truth. Let me make this concrete. You face a financial crisis, your bank account is empty, bills are overdue. Your natural response is panic, followed by petition prayer, begging God to send money. But that entire approach keeps you locked in lack consciousness, constantly affirming that you don't have enough. The practice Joel taught is radically different. You acknowledge the appearance of the empty bank account without giving it ultimate authority. You recognize that in spirit, in the realm of consciousness where everything originates, there is no lack. Infinite supply exists right now, always has, always will. As you rest in that recognition, as you refuse to empower the appearance of lack by fighting it or fearing it, your consciousness shifts from scarcity to abundance. And here's the key. Circumstances must reflect whatever consciousness you're holding. Not might reflect, must reflect. This is spiritual law operating with the same consistency as gravity. This practice requires a level of spiritual maturity that goes beyond technique. You're learning to hold two realities simultaneously, the appearance you're seeing and the truth that exists in consciousness, while giving ultimate authority only to truth. Drop truth over appearance in the comments if you're ready to practice this level of spiritual awareness. The moment you start practicing this recognition of truth over appearance, you'll notice something profound about time itself. Every spiritual problem you've ever experienced exists only when your mind leaves the present moment. Think about it right now in this exact second. Strip away all the mental commentary about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. Strip away the stories about what your problem means, where it came from, or how bad it could get. In this pure present moment, where is the actual problem? You're alive right now. You're breathing. You're conscious and aware. Whatever crisis your mind wants to rehearse exists either in past regret or future anxiety. But it doesn't exist in this precise moment of now. Joel Goldsmith taught that Christ consciousness is only accessible in the present because the present is the only place that actually exists. Everything else is mental projection. When Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is at hand, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He meant it's available right here, right now, in this moment. Not after you die, not after you prove yourself worthy, but in the eternal now that never leaves. This is where most spiritual seekers get confused. They think the practice of presence is about escaping from life's challenges or pretending problems don't exist. But it's actually the opposite. It's discovering where real life happens, which is always and only now. Pain might be present in this moment. Physical discomfort might be here. But suffering, the mental anguish we experience, requires thought about the past or future. Suffering requires the mind to tell stories about what the pain means, how long it will last, what it says about you, or what terrible outcomes might follow. Now, understanding the power of presence leads us to something even more foundational that Joel discovered through decades of spiritual practice. Every problem you face, every challenge that seems insurmountable, every miracle you're desperately seeking stems from one single belief. The belief in separation. You believe you're separate from God, separate from the supply you need, separate from the healing you want, separate from other people who seem to have what you lack. Joel called this separation consciousness the only actual sin, not in the moral sense of wrongdoing deserving punishment, but in the original meaning of the word, missing the mark of truth. Traditional religion teaches forgiveness when someone wrongs you, which sounds noble, but still reinforces the illusion that there are separate individuals in conflict with each other. Joel taught something far deeper that completely dissolves resentment at its root. There's no separate person to forgive because there's only one divine consciousness, appearing as many temporary forms. The person who betrayed you, hurt you, or disappointed you is divine consciousness temporarily forgetting itself, exactly as you sometimes forget your true nature. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior or mean you accept abuse. It removes the emotional charge that keeps you imprisoned by the past. When you recognize that everything you've been seeking exists right now in consciousness, and you've never actually been separate from it, the entire journey transforms. You're not pursuing abundance, health, or peace as external goals. You're recognizing they exist in your consciousness this very moment, and your work is simply allowing that recognition to become your lived experience. Type, I'm not separate. If this principle of oneness is beginning to dissolve, the illusion of lack in your awareness, once you begin recognizing oneness instead of separation, you naturally move into what Joel called living by grace, and this is where the journey becomes both liberating and terrifying. Grace isn't God's mercy toward undeserving sinners. Grace is the automatic flow of divine good that operates the moment. You stop trying to manipulate, control, and force outcomes through human effort. Every frantic attempt to make something happen comes from the deep belief that you're separate from Source, that if you don't hustle and scheme and strategize, nothing will work out. Living by grace means recognizing that the Source is already supplying everything before you even ask. This sounds passive to the achievement-oriented mind, but it's actually the most active spiritual practice possible because it requires constant vigilance against your mind's compulsive need to take control and make things happen through sheer willpower. Joel Goldsmith himself proved this principle most practically. He never advertised his lectures, never promoted his books, never marketed his ministry. He simply taught what he discovered, and thousands of people found their way to him across decades. Divine grace supplied every single thing that was needed without manipulation or effort. Your ego will rebel violently against this approach because it's built on the illusion that you must do something, must take charge, must ensure survival through constant action. But spiritual consciousness is always doing everything. Your work is getting out of the way and allowing grace to operate without interference. This requires a level of trust that feels impossible until you experience it working in your own life. Now here's something crucial that nobody warns you about, and it's the reason many people abandon this practice right when it's about to break through. When you first start practicing Christ consciousness, when you shift from petition to recognition, from separation to oneness, from control to grace, your circumstances might actually get worse before they improve. This isn't failure. This is the transition revealing everything false in your life, so truth can replace it. Sarah practiced Joel's teaching faithfully for 3 months and watched her entire life disintegrate. Her marriage hit a crisis point. Her business started failing. Her health declined. She called Joel in desperation, convinced she was doing something catastrophically wrong. His response shocked her. Everything false in your life is being revealed so truth can replace it. Don't abandon the practice now. Go deeper into Christ consciousness. This is where most people quit. They return to begging God to fix the chaos, not understanding that consciousness is actually cleaning house, dismantling everything not built on spiritual truth. Sarah stayed with the practice despite appearances suggesting total collapse. 6 months later, she looked back and saw with clarity that everything that fell apart absolutely needed to fall apart. The marriage that ended had been dead for years. The business that failed had drained her soul. The health crisis forced her to address patterns she'd been ignoring for decades. Joel's teaching hadn't caused the chaos. It had revealed what was already there beneath the surface. allowing her to rebuild from truth, instead of continuing to build on false foundations. This transition period tests your commitment to truth over comfort, to spiritual reality over familiar appearances, and it's where the real transformation begins to take root in your consciousness. Comment, I trust the process if you're willing to stay faithful to recognition even when circumstances seem to contradict what you're practicing. As you practice this shift in consciousness, you might encounter something frustrating. Certain patterns keep repeating despite your faithful practice. The same relationship dynamics surface with different people. The same financial struggles reappear in new forms. The same health issues cycle back after temporary improvement. Your mind screams that the practice isn't working, that maybe you're doing it wrong, or worse, that it's all nonsense. But Joel discovered that persistent patterns aren't evidence of failure. They're actually invitations to go deeper, to uncover hidden beliefs operating below your conscious awareness. Michael practiced recognizing abundance for years, yet poverty consciousness kept manifesting in his life. No matter how diligently he meditated or how sincerely he recognized spiritual supply, one day during a particularly deep meditation, the hidden belief finally surfaced into awareness. He believed that truly spiritual people should be poor to prove they're not materialistic, that wanting financial success somehow made him less devoted to God. This belief had been installed by years of religious conditioning, operating completely outside his conscious awareness, sabotaging every financial demonstration he tried to make. The moment he saw this unconscious belief clearly, he could recognize it as false. Spiritual consciousness knows nothing of poverty or wealth. Those are human concepts with no reality in the divine realm. Within months of releasing that hidden belief, Michael's entire financial situation transformed. Not because he hustled harder or got lucky, but because the internal block had been removed and consciousness could flow naturally. This is why brutal honesty with yourself becomes essential. You can't heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Every persistent problem in your life is pointing to a belief you don't know you're holding, inviting you to bring it into the light where truth can dissolve it. Now, the ultimate expression of this practice, the place where all this spiritual understanding leads, is what Joel called becoming transparent consciousness. This isn't about achieving some special status or becoming spiritually superior to others. It's about becoming so established in Christ consciousness, so clear of personal agenda and ego-driven motivation that divine consciousness can operate through you without obstruction. After decades of practice, Joel reached a state where he would simply sit in a room and be present, and people reported physical healings, emotional breakthroughs, and spiritual awakenings. He wasn't doing anything to them in the traditional sense. He wasn't praying for them, laying hands on them, or performing rituals. His consciousness had become so transparent to truth that anyone in his presence could feel the resonance of that clarity. Situations would resolve when he entered them. Peace would descend on chaotic environments. This is the same state Jesus demonstrated, and it's not reserved for special people or ancient prophets. It's available to you through persistent recognition of what's already true. You don't achieve transparency through effort. You achieve it by continuously releasing everything false until only truth remains. And that process happens naturally as you practice presence day after day, year after year, right? I'm becoming transparent. If you're committing to this journey of letting everything false until only truth remains, if you're still here with me, you've just taken a journey that most people will never experience because they're too comfortable with the familiar cage of traditional religious thinking. What we've explored today isn't just information. It's a transformation waiting to happen in your life the moment you begin. Practicing recognition over petition, presence over absence, oneness over separation. This channel exists to bring you these hidden truths that have been buried under centuries of institutional control, to give you practical spiritual tools that actually work when you apply them. If this resonates with you, if you want to continue exploring the mysteries that change everything about how you experience reality, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to uncover together, and I'm committed to bringing you content that shifts consciousness, not just fills time. Drop a comment right now saying, "This was meant for me," so I know you made it all the way through. I read every single comment, and there's something powerful about declaring your commitment to this path publicly. It anchors the decision in your consciousness, And if this video opened doors in your awareness that have been locked for years, hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who are ready for it. People who are tired of begging and ready to start recognizing. There's a video right here that goes even deeper into how to dissolve the blocks that keep miracles from manifesting instantly in your experience. Click and continue with me over there, because what you've learned today is just the beginning of understanding how spiritual law actually operates in your life. Thanks for watching.